Stephen Hufford, Hufford, and rank was CYN3, E4 rate. And that is Communications Yeoman, a rate created just for the Vietnam War. April of 1966, in the height of the Vietnam War, I was attending college, had a student deferment, so I was not eligible for the draft at that time. But I got the playing cards too much in the student union, and my English grade was really tumbling. And it happened one day, I was playing the cards at the union, and my English professor walked in, and he said, "Mr. Hufford, you know you're flunking English this semester," which disqualified me from the student deferment. So I immediately went down to the recruiting center, and I talked to all services. We had in Kansas City, Missouri, they had a recruiting center that included all military branches and reserve units. And so I took a test, had a physical, and took the a test for, I guess you'd call it an intelligence test, IQ test, whatever, took those tests. So I really qualified high on every service. Every recruiter wanted to talk to me because of my grade. But one thing I found out is that I'm colorblind. I never knew it. So that kind of limited me to what I could do. And I thought the best alternative would be the Navy, because as they say in the Navy, you get a dry cot and 3 hots a day. And that sure beat crawling around in a foxhole with bullets flying over my head. So I made the choice of going signing up for the Navy. And so my first action as a Navy recruit was to board a train in Kansas City, because the trains were still privatized. So I was the Santa Fe chief running to San Diego, directly to San Diego. So that was about a 3-day journey. And me being 22 years old at that time, I was older than all of the recruits that were with us on that train. So at every whistle stop, they handed me a fistful of dollars and sent me off the train so I could buy a bottle or 2 of liquor. And so we got to party all the way to San Diego, and we had a great time. And when we arrived at San Diego, and we were put on a bus, and we were driven over to the San Diego reception center. And I got off the bus, and we were all lined up, and a chief petty officer came up. You know, he was really pretty gruff. They made us all stand at attention. And I raised my hand and I said, "Sir, where is the bathroom? I got to go to the bathroom." And the chief said, "Young man, you never call me sir. I am a chief. You call me chief, not sir. I'm not an officer. And we don't have bathrooms in the Navy. So I guess you can't go to the bathroom, but I will let you go to the head." And so that was my first lesson in decorum in the Navy. The biggest transition was that your life was structured for you, and you kind of had to go where they wanted you to go, when you wanted to go. And I learned early in my naval career is you don't ask questions. You just do what you're told. You do what you're told, even though you may not agree with it, then you get along just fine. And from there, we were assigned a unit, and I was in Company 254. And that was the 254th training unit of the year 1966. And there were 60 men in the unit, in the company. And so the first day there, the chief, who was going to be our company commander, Chief Radioman Riebenscheid, was going to be our guide through our first days of Navy life. And then he interviewed us all, everybody in the company of the 60 men. and he wanted to know our age, what we did before we came into the Navy. And so I told him I was 22, and I was working part-time as in a restaurant as assistant manager and cook while I was going to school. And he said, "Okay, young man, you stand over to the side." So I did. And he went through it. He picked out some other guy. He had us all stand over to the side. And then he sent everybody else out of the room. And he came to me and he said, "Since you have experience, you're a little bit older, you have experience of leading people, I am going to assign you as company master at arms for the duration of boot camp. So you will be in charge of the barracks. You must make sure it passes inspection. It must be cleaned, it must be swabbed, and everything must be spick and span, including the toilets. But you, as a recruit petty officer, are a leader of men, not a doer or a follower. So if I ever walk in and catch you with a swab in your hand, a dust rag in your hand, young man, you're going to really regret it, because you are a leader, not a follower." So I said, "Okay, I'll agree with that." So I found out that every day I had to pick 6 men to stay back at the barracks to clean it, while the rest of the unit went out to the parade grounds. In San Diego, it was pretty warm on the parade grounds. And we carried an OM1 rifle that had the barrel stuffed up. It was not shootable, but it weighed about maybe 10, 15 pounds. And they all got to practice for the parade every morning. I never had to go to the grinder. I never practiced the parades, and I never did the 16-count manual arms for about 4 hours like they did. And when they came back, then we started our school. We started going to classes. And so that was kind of, and we had classes were from, I think it was 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 o'clock. And all the tests we went through and all the things we were learning. And after our evening meal, we had free time. But in 1966, an enlisted man, we could not bring anything. We had no deodorant. We had all we had was shaving equipment. Couldn't have a radio. We couldn't have, of course, there was no TV. So we had no entertainment other than ourselves. And we were instructed that I had better never ever get a letter or a telephone call from your mother checking up to see how you're doing. And if I do, you are going to regret it. So we learned to write letters to our mothers, and keeping them happy and keeping our chief happy. So it was kind of an experience, but so I really had it fairly easy going through boot camp, other than the other guys, and I'm really grateful for that. And in boot camp, and after we did all the tests, they told me that since I'm colorblind, I cannot do anything in aviation or electronics. So, and we don't want you to be a bosun mate. So we're going to give you a typing test. And I took my typing test, and after I was finished with it, they graded it and took off for the errors. I typed a magical -5 words per minute. And they said, "Okay, young man, we're going to teach you how to type. We're going to send you to Communications Yeoman School in Norfolk, Virginia." And for you folks that don't know what a communication yeoman is, it's a teletype operator. And you probably don't even know what a teletype is, but it is, at that time, it was an electronic means of communicating. It's an electric typewriter that you typed, and a tape came out, like a ticker tape, and that ticker tape then would feed into another machine, and it would print the document. Electric typewriter maybe, and printer all combined. And I was assigned night school because we were doing so many men through the Communications Yeoman School that they had to have day classes and night classes. And they assigned me to night classes, And at first I was kind of upset about that because I wanted to have the evening off. But then I found out that since we worked the night, we didn't have to stand fire watches like the day guys did. So the guys that went to the day school, every fourth day, they had to stand a 4-hour fire watch, walking around the base, checking for fires or checking for anybody to be on the base that shouldn't be there. And since we were evening night classes, we didn't have to do that because the base was active during the day, so they didn't need the fire watch. So I had a really good time, I guess, in a kind of easy time through my school. Then after I graduated from, they did teach me how to type. I learned how to type. Didn't learn how to spell very good, but I could still type. And then I was assigned, and I met a guy in my boot camp class that also, and his name was Sammy. I won't tell you the last name because he doesn't know I'm talking about him. But he was from the South. He was from Alabama. And we were really good friends, and we both got assigned to Nea-Markeri, Greece, and as our first duty station. And it was right near Athens, Greece. And so he called his mother and said, "Mom, guess what? I'm going to Athens." "Oh, that's fine, son. You're just right up the road. Athens, Georgia is not too far from here." So he had to break it to his mother that it was a little bit further away. So I went to my first duty station, then was Nea-Markeri, Greece, which was on the Marathon Bay, which is still there on the Marathon Bay, the town is. At that time it was a little sleeping fishing village. And it was 2 miles or 2 kilometers north of Marathon, where the marathon runners started from. So it's kind of a historical place. And we had 100 men on the base. And in those days, in that period of time, in the 60s and early 70s, women were not allowed overseas duty or ship duty. So it was all men on the base. There was no female sailors with us. And our base was made up of a bunch of tractor trailer trucks that they parked close together, cut a hole in them, and then moved them together and welded them. So we had this big complex, almost looked like maybe the Pentagon, where they were all put together like that. So and it was what they call a relay station. And what we did is we didn't create our own messages. Everything that we did, a message came from somebody else. It was the whole Mediterranean area. Ships at sea in the Mediterranean, embassies in that area of the, would all send messages. And before the satellites, when it was strictly radio communications, the radio beams go in a straight line. They don't follow the curvature of the earth. So every so many thousands of miles, they had to have a relay station to catch the message and bend it and send it around the circumference of the earth. So it was really pretty interesting. And we had really great duty. Everybody that I know of that ever served in Nea-Markeri, that was their best duty station that they had, because the people were really, really gracious, and they appreciated us. And so it was really a good time in my life. And then going back, I'll go back to Nea-Markeri, Greece. When I was there, me and 2 other gentlemen got together and we rented a beach house. So the 3 of us moved off the base and we lived in a beach house for our time. And that was really a lot of fun. And at that time, the Greece, you couldn't wear your uniform off the base because the political climate and some of the protesters didn't like the Americans. So it's just like a job, like a civilian job. Once you got your watch or your time, which were 8 to 5, 5 to midnight to 8. So just as soon as you were done with your 8-hour shift, you're free to go. So we would go off the base, we would go to our beach house. We had to pay for it out of our own money because the Navy had a space for us to sleep, so we didn't get BAQ or anything like that. But $25 a piece wasn't bad, but of course we were only making $200 a month, so yeah, it's kind of everything's relative. But you know, we didn't have to worry about groceries because we could still eat on base most of the time if we wanted to, and so it was pretty good. Then I was assigned from there. I volunteered to go on a riverboat in Vietnam, and they sent me to an aircraft carrier in Pennsylvania because the Saratoga was just finishing up a retrofit in Philadelphia shipyards when I went aboard. And when I first saw it, I was coming in from the air because the naval station is right by the airport, and I looked out and somebody said, "There are the ships," and I saw this. I didn't know at the time, but that was the Saratoga, and there were guys up on the flight deck playing football and softball. That's how big it was. So I learned when I went aboard then that it was 1,000 feet long, and at sea it had a crew of 5,000, and it carried about 90 airplanes, a couple of helicopters, and a couple of fire trucks, regular-sized fire trucks. It was a city, a floating city with its own airport. I volunteered for a riverboat, but as it is, everything you volunteer, it seems like you get the opposite. So the riverboat was the smallest thing you could be on in the Navy, and a carrier was the biggest. I volunteered for the smallest, and I got the biggest. So what can I say? And being that I was a communications yeoman, when I first reported to the chief, Malloy, he said, "Oh, so you're a communications yeoman. I'm going to make you the division yeoman." And a yeoman, for those that don't know Navy terms, a yeoman basically is a secretary. And so I was he assigned me to be the division yeoman and training petty officer. And oh, by the way, I guess I got my rank up to E4 at that time, so I was a communications yeoman 3rd class. And I never served a watch like the other guys did, like the actual radioman, because communications CR division is communications radio. And so, but I never stood a watch with a group of men. I was in an office with a lieutenant and 2 chiefs. So I was not really with the enlisted men per se. But so it was a little bit different, and I worked from 8, what they call a day watcher. I worked from 8 to 5, just like a normal job, with Sunday off. But the regular guys that did radio and CYNs in the radio division, they worked what they call port and starboard. So they worked 12 on, 12 off all the time when they were at sea. But I never had to do that. I just did my 8 to 5. And my chief was gracious enough to give me a watch standard card. And what that meant is a Liberty card, getting off the ship. And if you had a watch standard card, you could leave the ship at any time and come back at any time while the ship was in port, just as long as you didn't miss the departure. And also it gave you head-of-the-line meal privileges at the galley. So again, I lucked out. I had a pretty easy thing because I didn't have to do the 12 hours on and 12 hours off. I got my regular sleep. And on the Saratoga, there were 2 divisions in the communications department. One was CR, Communication Radio, and the second was SN, and that was a signal division. And that's the guys with the flags. So so we had, between our 2 sleeping compartments, there was a lounge, and we had chairs and tables in there so we could play cards, write letters, do whatever, and watch TV. Now, we didn't have satellites at that time, so all the TV programs were flown on. So we could see regular TV, but just a week late. And so it was, again, so we had a floating city. We had everything, except we just couldn't get off. that anybody had. My first impression was, wow, that thing is huge. How will I ever find my way around? And I must say that I guess I kind of forgot in my earlier thing, is I thought when I went aboard ship, I would have a porthole that I could look out, have it right by my rack, almost like a cruise ship. But I come to find out, no, you don't have a rack. And they have a hangar bay inside the ship, and that's where they store the planes a lot of times and work on them and refuel them, and they arm them down there sometimes, and sometimes it's on the flight deck. And I was on the 3 level of the ship, and the 3 means 3 levels up from the sea level. And then they go 03, 01, 02, all the way down, and there was about, I think there was 12 decks below sea level, and there was like 20 decks above, because in the tower, or the island, what they call the island, there's that fixture on the outside where all the command posts and the flight operations are kind of controlled from. Each level there is considered a level, even up to where there's only like a 2-man space. So it was huge up there, and you had to kind of get used to the noise. In my unit, the third level, we were just above the hangar bay, and just below the flight deck. And so on my rack, they had six bunks. They had 3 bunks high, and under the bunk you could lift it up, and there was like a storage area of maybe 3 or 4 feet that you could 3 or 4 feet, 3 or 4 inches that you could store stuff under your rack or your bed and a mattress and fold it down. And the ends were solid, and one side was solid, and on the one side that was solid was another space of maybe about 4 inches that slid, and you had more storage area in there to store your own personal stuff. And you had maybe a 4x4 locker against the wall that had a stack of them all. They had the 6 lockers stacked between the beds, and you can store a little stuff in there. And we had a vent that came into our bed at our head level, and a lamp that you could light so you could read in your bed. And then also in that vent, you could kind of open it up and close it so you had some circulation of air, either cool or heated, depending on the season and your weather conditions outside. And they had a little curtain that you could slide from your toes to your head, so you kind of got in your little cocoon, a little bit of privacy. But you're sleeping with 6 men in a standing space of maybe 3 feet from one bunk to the other bunk. And so you got really got to know people. You're really close. And but we did have like I said earlier, we had a lounge right next to our sleeping area, what they call a lounge, so we could get out and have some space and move around. So the operation really, our ship, we were kind of in the peacetime, even though it was during the Vietnam era. We served in the Mediterranean, so we did not see any combat action or any war action. And in my whole career, both in Greece and on the ship, I was a Vietnam era veteran, not a Vietnam veteran. So I never entered a combat zone. The Saratoga and a later cruise did go over to Vietnam, and they did serve combat missions. But my tour of duty, there was no combat. So I would consider myself very lucky. We came in contact with NATO twice. One time we had right outside on the Saratoga, just outside of Norfolk, Virginia. They had a NATO exercise where they had all the NATO forces, naval forces, all the naval units including submarines from the NATO forces. And President Nixon at that time flew out to watch the exercise from the deck of the Saratoga. So that was kind of exciting. We got to see a lot of missiles being shot from a submarine coming up. Everything that a naval force would do, we got to see. But it was only practice. It wasn't in reality. General quarters located for me was on the flight deck on the catwalks, and the catwalks were right along the flight deck. They had like a drop down, and it was like a balcony, if you could recall it, if you could picture it, that ran the length of the ship, and you could kind of duck down, and the planes would go over you when they were launched. So that was my general quarters location, and at one time, at Christmas time, Bob Hope back in the '60s had a show that he would go to different military bases around the world and put on a Christmas show. And so he did that on our cruise in '69. Came aboard at Naples, I believe, was where we were. And when they came aboard, and he brought all of his entertainers with him, and so we had kind of a deal. And I was assigned to be an escort for one of the Golden Girls for the Bob Hope. And so, it was pretty exciting, except at that time I was married, so they made me get a notice from my wife it would be okay for me to escort a Golden Girl. So, but it was kind of a thing for my parents and my wife, is because when they fanned the audience, I was right there in front because I had to escort the girls around, so I got my ugly mug on TV, and my family were able to see me. So, again, all I can say is it's the luck of the draw, and definitely the luck of the draw, and I got very lucky. On holidays, Christmas meal, Christmas, Thanksgiving, we had all the trimmings and what have you. But the only trouble is the lines were long because it was kind of a layoff day for really the whole crew. But so even though we had I didn't go because they had what they call the Gee Dunk, or a store that you could go down there and buy stuff. All your meals, the chow hall was open 23 hours a day. So everything you ate in the chow hall was free. You could eat as much as you want, drink as much as you want. Of course, there was no alcohol, but eat and drink as much as you want with no cost. But in the Gee Dunk, they had things like ice cream cones and malts and hamburgers and hot dogs. Those you had to buy. So that's what I would do. I'd just go to the Gee Dunk, buy myself a hot dog, and that was my Thanksgiving dinner. They did have athletic events that you could participate down in the hangar bay, and it was big enough that they could play volleyball and basketball. And entertainment, we did have every division on the ship had a lounge, and every lounge had a TV, closed circuit TV thing. And they did fly on because being serviced in the Mediterranean, we were pretty close, really speaking, to shore. It wasn't that far from shore anytime we were in there. And they had these 2-engine airplanes they called the Goonie Birds. And they they fly in supplies every day. So every day they would fly in the film from the TV shows and movies from the U.S., and they would show them over our closed-circuit TV. So we were just a week late, but we could see most anything that we wanted to see. And so it was, as far as, I guess, being a separation, it was a 9-month tour without being, but we did have our entertainment when we went ashore, when they did their shore calls. And I finished up my career. I did 18 months on the ship, and when it came back to Mayport for the turnaround and resupplying, I was able to get off, and I got out 3 months early because I applied for an educational early out, which I did receive. So the day the ship pulled into port, I had my sea bag packed, and off I went to the keg that was sitting there. And so I left. And generally you do, after your enlistment, you did a reserve period. But because of my rating as communications yeoman in the Kansas City area, there was no billet or job opening for a communications yeoman. So I was relieved from my reserve responsibility because I had no place to go. And the Navy strictly is replacement by person, not by a unit. So every job opening comes up, you have to take a test for it. And they pick the highest scoring test person to fill that billet or that position. So I was, again, pretty lucky in my Navy career. I can't complain. It kind of was almost a vacation paid by the taxpayers. And but I think I really enjoyed it, and I would do it all over again if I had to or if I could. So I think that's kind of my story of my naval career. Well, I think the memorable story is just the interaction between the guys and the reactions that we did, and the shore leaves that we went on, and the general camaraderie that we have and still carry on to this day. And like, I am aging out, and on my ship, the Saratoga, it was decommissioned in 1994. So there are no more Saratoga sailors. And when we're gone, that's the end of it. And kind of to go back, there was another Saratoga in World War II, Saratoga CV3, and it served in World War II, and it survived World War II, but it met its end during the after stages of the, maybe in the Cold War, when we were testing atomic bombs and what they would do. They took a whole fleet of World War II ships that they were going to muster out of the fleet, and lined them up like they were a flotilla, armament flotilla at the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific. And they dropped an atomic bomb down on them, and to see what would happen. You know, it was a test to see if we could survive an atomic bomb. Saratoga didn't go under. All the other ones did. Saratoga stayed afloat. But they did then finally went in and they cut a couple of holes in the hull and let it sink to the bottom. So the CV3 Saratoga is now an atoll, is a coral base for fish at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And the Saratoga that I was on was commissioned in 1956, and it was, you know, a larger ship. And so and the new naming protocol that the Navy uses, there will no, at this time there is little hope that there'll ever be another Saratoga. This is the end of the line. And in that fashion, this is our 71st Saratoga reunion. So that goes back to the CV3 World War II veterans started the organization, the reunions, and we co-mingled and had it together. And they attended ours when theirs was gone. They attended ours. And I think it was 2 years ago was the last year that I could remember a World War II Saratoga sailor being able to make it to one of our reunions. But there are still some of their widows that come to this day, come to the reunion. I think once you go to the reunion, you don't know a stranger. You didn't know these guys on the ship. Maybe I had 7 that I actually served with on my deployment when I started going to the reunions. But there was about 40 that either served before me or served after me in that same division. So, you know, we all kind of bonded together. And generally on the ship, it's so big, you kind of socialized with the men in your own division. It's just like a city. You don't know everybody in the city. And you have a neighbor that you might see him and say hello, but you don't really know him, you don't really associate. And that's kind of like it is. But at the reunions, everybody is your shipmate. And so you commingle and you learn and you become friends with people that you don't know. And the way this kind of works, there was a man that his name is Sammy, and I'll just say first names because again he doesn't know this, but he served before me. But I got to know him at the reunions, and he lives in Kentucky, and I live in Missouri. But we became friends, and he had come to Kansas City every now and then, and because his granddaughter moved out here, come to see her. And there was another guy, his name is Dennis, and he served on the Saratoga after me. But he actually was here in Harrisburg. He was born and raised in this area, but he moved to Kansas. Now he lives down by Wichita, Kansas. And he got a ticket, 4 tickets to the NASCAR race. And he didn't know anybody, he didn't really know anybody that in that area that served on the Saratoga. So he called Sammy in Kentucky and asked Sammy, do you know anybody in the Kansas City area that would like to go to a NASCAR race? So Sammy called me in Missouri and said, hey, Steve, would you like to go to a NASCAR race? Because there's this guy, Dennis, in Wichita that has 4 tickets. And he would like to know if I knew anybody that had a wife and wanted to go with him and his wife to the race. I said, well, I'll check with my wife. And I talked to my wife. She said, yeah, we'll go. And so I called Sammy. Sammy called Dennis. Dennis called me, and we met. We met at the Kansas Speedway maybe 3 years ago. And now we're friends. And Dennis actually was the sponsor of this reunion because he was originally from the Harrisburg area. So you build these relationships, and you never, ever, ever know when you going to meet somebody. And kind of, if you think about back at Nehemiah, there's 100 men on the base. And there's a town called Parkville, Missouri, outside of Kansas City. It has a population of about 2,000 people, 20,000 people. And it's a suburb of Kansas City. And my dentist office happened to be in Parkville. So I went to the dentist office one day, and I was sitting there waiting for the dentist to see me. And there was this couple, I would say older, but I'm kind of older too, but they weren't young kids. And I heard him say something to his wife about when he was in Greece that he had gone to see the Acropolis. And I interrupted, and I said, oh, you've been to Greece? And he says, yeah. I says, I was in the Navy. And I said, oh, you were? He said, yeah, I was in the Navy. And I said, well, where were you? And he said, oh, I was at, you never heard of it. It's a little town called Nehemiah. And so here we are, thousands of miles away, and you never, so now we're friends. And then to even top it all off, one of the guys that I shared the beach house with, Bernie, who is from the Pittsburgh area, but made a career out of the Navy and retired as a chief down in Florida. And when he re-enlisted, he married a Greek girl, and they're still married at this time. And he did a second tour of duty at Nehemiah. And Ed, that I met at my dentist's office, actually knew Bernie because he served with Bernie on his second term when he was there. And so you just, these things that kind of camaraderie that you develop and you have with military service, I think it's just miraculous. And then another time, my son volunteers for Park and Rec volleyball, and he coaches teams, volleyball teams in Parkville School District. And I usually volunteer to line judge for the games. And I walked in one time with my Saratoga hat on, and this guy come up to me and says, oh, you were in the Navy? And I said, yeah, I was in the Navy. He said, well, so was I. Oh, really? Where were you? And he said, well, you probably never heard of this place, but Nehemiah, Greece. And I said, what? He said, yeah, Nehemiah, Greece. And actually, I was a CB, and we built the base. So, you know, you just never, ever know. And that's why I am proud. I'm proud that I served, and I would do it again.